Around 10,000 games come out every year. And that's just on Steam. Yeah, most of these games are trash and no one will ever play them. But how do you decide which games are worth your time? How do you separate the wheat from the chaff? How do you decide if a game is worth your time? And more importantly, worth your hard-earned money? In comes IGN, one of the biggest video game review sites on the internet. Every new major game release, thousands of gamers eagerly await IGN's verdict with bated breath. If IGN gives a game an 8 or above, it's a good game, and celebrations are in order. 7 or below, and it's the worst game to ever exist. And a few death threats are sent. Death threats, if you're unfamiliar, are the opposite of get well soon cards. But what's the real purpose behind IGN's game reviews? Is it simply to assign arbitrary scores and ignite the flames of fanboy wars? Or is there a deeper significance lurking beneath the surface? In this video I ask, what's the point of IGN reviews? Game reviews play a pivotal role in guiding potential buyers of the game towards making an informed decision. Reviews go over a lot of what a game has to offer. They provide insights into the game's mechanics, giving basic info on what the gameplay is like, what its strengths are, what its weaknesses are, and what it feels like to play the game.
Arkham Asylum makes you feel like you're Batman.
To make you feel like Spider-Man?
Full of the exaggerated swagger of a black teen.
Reviews go into the fundamental elements of the game's narratives, exploring the game's premise, its character, the plot, and what the story achieves in the context of the overall game experience. They dissect whether the narrative enriches the gameplay or if it simply serves as a background noise. This helps a story-focused player to know if the story is worth a damn in the game. And video reviews are a great medium to showcase not just the graphics but also the fluidity of the animation, abundance of environment details, and overall visual immersion of a game. They allow the viewers to witness firsthand the graphical fidelity and artistry that's achieved in the game that can either elevate the game or sometimes detract from the gaming experience. This provides a valuable insight to graphics-focused players. Everything combined, you will generally have a good idea as to the nature of a game and if it will appeal to you after watching an IGN review. Research shows that online consumer reviews significantly influence the demand for video games. For instance, a study published in the Computer Games Journal found that professional critics' review of games can influence the sale of games. That's just what the abstract tells me. I'm not paying to read the whole article. I'm sorry, 40 euros to read the article. I'll pass. We don't need research to tell us that good reviews boost sales and bad reviews hurt it. It's obvious, although I am curious as to how they measure it scientifically. Not 40 euros curious. Reviews are good and all, but the problem I have with IGN reviews are not the content of the review themselves, but more about the scores that they give. They're not the only ones who give out scores, of course, but it seems that a game's entire worth is sometimes based on IGN reviews these days. When IGN gave Starfield a 7 out of 10, there was an outrage among the fans that thought that the review was unfair, even though the game was not even out yet for the general public. But a few months after release, it seems like there's this culture surrounding game reviews where people watch them just to justify their purchase instead of informing their purchase. If you give high scores, you're a good reviewer. If you give low scores, you're a bad reviewer. Video Game Donkey made an excellent video making fun of this exact thing. You should check it out. Reviews, by their very nature, are the opinion of a single person, or in some cases, a small group of people. These people will have their own preferences and biases. And since it is their job to play every new game that comes out, they play a lot more games than the average gamer. This, I believe, is a double-edged sword. On one hand, having played a lot more games means your opinion is more valuable, since you can compare your experiences with other games that you played before, and so you'll make a better judgment as to the quality of the game and how it stands compared to the other games. But on the other hand, it is still a job. There are deadlines to hit, and you have to rush through a lot of games, trying to desperately finish it as fast as you can and get the review out as soon as possible. This may actually hurt your opinion of a game that's meant to be played slowly. I'm sure this is why a lot of professional game reviewers didn't really like Death Stranding. Death Stranding is a game that's meant to be played slowly, taking in the scenery, doing 1 or 2 deliveries a day. It's the perfect game to unwind after a long day at work. So is it any surprise that people who played it as a job didn't enjoy it? So how do we mitigate this bias? Well, obviously, watching a single review from a single site before making a purchase is just a bad idea. It's always best to look at reviews from a variety of sources. But you're lazy and you don't want to look at multiple sites and videos. So what to do? This is where Metacritic comes in. Metacritic and its competitor OpenCritics are some of the largest review score aggregators. They take review scores from thousands of publications and review sites and boil them down to a digestible number. Seems like a good idea in theory. Actually, it's such a good idea that game developers' bonuses are now tied to getting good Metacritic scores. And that's where the issue lies. Now that there is a financial consequence on review scores, large review sites like IGN have stopped giving low scores altogether. Unless a game is an outright scam, like the day before, they hardly ever give a 1 out of 10 these days. If you look at the worst rated games by IGN, it's all older titles from multiple generations ago. You could give IGN the benefit of the doubt. Maybe games are just getting better these days, and all games coming out are always at least a 5 out of 10 in their eyes, just because of the sheer effort that goes into making them. But I have to wonder if they feel a moral obligation to slightly bump up the review scores, especially since they have a working relationship with game developers and publishers that they don't want to ruin. This is more of a conspiracy theory than hard fact, but it's interesting to think about nonetheless. Speaking of developers, another benefit that a review should hold is to provide feedback to the developers of the game, letting the developers know what works, what doesn't, and what's broken. Some issues developers can fix in a patch or 2, others like design issues might get fixed in a sequel. All developers take user feedback into account while fixing their games, of course, but what extent do they take IGN reviews as feedback? IGN reviews seem more like a report card of how a developer did rather than mechanism for feedback. The bigger the studio, the less likely they take the advice given by reviews, it seems. The suits at the upper management will continue to shove microtransaction down our throats no matter how many reviews say that they do not like it. To be fair, the difference between a game with microtransactions and one without is around $1 billion. So of course they're gonna shovel more microtransactions into the game. Anyway, back to the topic at hand. I think developers would rather reviewers tell them the negatives of the game in private rather than say it publicly in a review, since negativity in a review would probably drive down sales of the game, especially if it's bugs that could be ironed out in a day 1 patch. Once a review comes out, it remains that way forever. Only in rare cases are they re-reviewed or rescored. This is one area Steam reviews are better at, since they show recent review sentiment as well as overall review sentiment. Games which fix their issues or update the games with new content are rewarded with positive reviews. It makes comeback stories like No Man's Sky or Cyberpunk a reality. This kind of change is only possible through a positive feedback loop between the developer and the player. Professional review might give a wide overview as to the aspects of the game that could be better, but they do not actually help developers improve the product. After all, it's just the experience of one person playing the game. The data these companies collect from millions of players playing the game is far more useful for bug fixes than an IGN review. Every new big game release already has people calling it trash and people calling it the greatest game ever before they've even played the game. Since major review sites like IGN get to play the games early, their reviews are often used as ammunition for these kind of trash debates. Debates is a strong word here. These are more like shouting matches between console fanboys on Twitter. Reviews can sometimes contribute to the culture wars within the gaming communities. Controversial reviews and polarizing articles can stir up debates and conflicts all over the internet. Topics such as representation, inclusivity, and political correctness in games have turned discussion extremely toxic. It's people bringing their political baggage into the video game discussions. Video game won't be ruined by letting you select pronouns, but adding pronouns to your game doesn't magically make it a fun game either. Accessibility options are a net positive for everyone, not just people with disabilities. But not all games need to be for everyone. Game developers shouldn't sacrifice fun at the altar of appeasement. Volition, the developers behind the Saints Row series, learned this the hard way. The Saints Row reboot tried so hard not to be labeled problematic. It went too much in the opposite direction, giving us dialogue so cringy that only Reddit monitors could have written such garbage.
Told you before, the idols are trying to build a post-capitalist society where money is not a concept.
Yeah?
Even that writing would have been forgiven if the gameplay was any good. But it wasn't. Hell, even the graphics were so bad it made the game look like an Unreal Engine asset flip. The end result was the studio shutting down and a lot of good developers losing their jobs. Now, I'm not blaming IGN for perpetuating culture wars. That's Kotaku's business. I'm just saying, people were really mad when IGN gave The Last of Us a 10 out of 10. But were they wrong though? Well, that raises the question, how often is IGN right or wrong? Do their reviews hold up the test of time? This is a tough question to answer. How a person feels about a game is purely subjective. There are a multitude of factors that go into determining whether someone likes a game or not. So it's hard to say whether a game review holds up or not. It might hold up for me, but not for you, and vice versa. We could compare review scores and sales figures of the game, but sales are determined more by the publisher's marketing budget than the game's quality, so it's not a good metric for this. Several games which receive ton of critical praise hold no candle to the latest Call of Duty. A 10 out of 10 fresh new IP will sell much less than its mediocre sequel. No, we need to compare the reviews against a better statistic. Since IGN reviews are mainly to inform game purchases, we need to look at how the customer felt about the game after they purchased and played the game. How do the users rate the game, and how does it compare against the IGN review? When I say comparing critic scores to user scores, Metacritic immediately comes to mind, since they show those two scores side by side. But this is a very bad comparison. Although Metacritic does allow users to submit their reviews of the game, they have no way of actually determining whether the users have actually played the game or not. This is a huge flaw in the system. I could go on Metacritic and leave a bad review for Destiny 2, even if I've never played the game at all. This huge loophole has led to hate campaigns and review bombs of games because of reasons unrelated to the quality of the games, and quite a few times because of the politics of the games, by people who never even played the games. This makes Metacritic quite useless at the one thing it does. Okay, so where can we get direct user reviews of games while making sure that they actually purchase the game? Well, that's where Steam comes in. Steam lets you publish reviews of a game, but only if you own the game. Not only that, but it shows how many hours of the game the user has played, both at the time of the review as well as how many hours they currently have in the game. This gives us the most accurate overview of the quality of the game. This doesn't really stop people from review bombing, of course, but there is a difference between anyone being able to give zeros to a game they hate on Metacritic and the purchasing customer leaving a negative review on Steam. To hate the game, you have to purchase the game first on Steam. Even if someone organizes a hate campaign to review bomb the game on Steam, you can see how many hours the person who left the review played the game. So a bunch of 0-hour reviews won't be worth much. Now, there is a difference between the 0 to 10 scale that IGN reviews operate on and the thumbs up, thumbs down way Steam asks for reviews. These are apples and oranges, but we're not conducting a scientific study and charging 40 euros for it. We just want to know generally how well IGN reviews hold up. If IGN gave a game 8 out of 10, I would hope that 80% of Steam reviews are positive. It's just a crude comparison. The first thing to do is to compile a list of games. For this, I decided to pick the last handful of games I've played. It's a good mix of new games and old games, some AAA, some indie. I'm going to skip over games that were given perfect scores because no way 100% of Steam users would leave a positive rating on the game. Looking at this, one thing I noticed is that apparently I only play really good games. What can I say? I have excellent taste. But more importantly, looks like for the most part, IGN reviews scores are accurate to about 10% of the Steam reviews. There are a few exceptions. Kingdom is a relatively obscure indie game and it's free to play, so the Steam reviews are skewed more positive for this one. Death Stranding, as I discussed before, is a game that takes time to enjoy and doesn't really gel well with the modern video game review cycle. Not to mention, the Steam version came out more than 6 months after the initial PS4 release, so a lot more people knew what they were getting into before buying the game. It's not a game for everyone, but if you're into it, you'll really love it. So, do IGN reviews hold up? I say yes, for the most part. IGN reviews are a pretty good representation of a game's quality. But let me reiterate, video games are a subjective experience. Though IGN reviews are generally accurate, it may not be accurate to your particular taste. It's just the nature of reviews. The things I talked about are not exclusive to IGN by any means. Positives and negatives are common across the industry. I just chose to pick on IGN because I'm still salty about their Death Stranding review. Video game reviews are fascinating to me. They're such an important tool for a consumer to make informed purchases. But it's important to remember that there is always an inherent bias in these reviews. Instead of these reviews helping developers improve their games, we use it as a weapon in our culture wars on Twitter. But at the end of the day, IGN reviews are alright.